Thank you, everybody, for showing up this evening and watching the film ahead of time. It's great to see people kind of joining the room here. This is a new experience for our Cinema Tuesdays series for Texas Public Radio during our pandemic times, where normally we've been looking at an Amazon film, something available here. But when I saw, or when I first heard Chelsea Hernandez on Texas Standard talking about her film, Building the American Dream, I immediately looked it up on the PBS website and saw that it was available and that they were encouraging watch parties with this film. So I said to myself, I'd like to make this part of our Cinema Tuesday series, and it's great to have it, this event today on the first day of early voting here in Texas today, as well as at the tail end of Hispanic Heritage Month here as well. So first of all, welcome Chelsea Hernandez, the director of Building the American Dream. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Nathan, for having this. This is great, and like you said, it's so great to share this film with everyone and celebrate in this discussion as well, especially on the first day of early voting in Texas. And I hope Congressman Castro can get his microphone and camera to work.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to ask a question as we go through our discussion, there are two ways that you can do it. You can either, as when I start to kind of open it up for questions for everybody, you can either type your question in the chat box up there, and I'll see it appear, and I'll relay it to our participants. Or if you want to, if you can turn on your camera and just raise your hand like that, then I'll look for you and then unmute your mic, and we'll be able to ask a question that way as well. So either option works. We just want to be able to allow you to interact with the participants tonight on this discussion. The first thing I was thinking about, Chelsea, after I watched this movie and saw it is, going back to the very beginning of how the participants in the film, how the subjects, how does the typical construction worker in Texas get a job? Is there an agreement signed? Is there a contract of some sort? I mean, that's the thing that when you see the film, I think the layperson coming from outside the issue may think, well, how does it work at the beginning?
Yeah, there's a lot of trust that people just expect and go into. And as we saw with Claudia and her husband, Alex, they trusted that this man who had hired them, who had hired them for previous jobs before. So there was a little bit of trust there already, but they just trusted that he would pay them. And even though a month had passed and they were waiting for payment and had asked for it, and he said he'll get them the money, it was coming, it was just delayed, they kept working because they trusted him. So there is a lack of contracts. Texas has a large contractor workforce. There's a lot of misclassification that happens as well. There are a lot of workers who are classified as employees and are misclassified as contractors, and it's just a loophole that employers can get away with and not provide compensation or health insurance, and there's just such a great shortage of workers in the construction industry that employers know they can take advantage of these workers and treat them as disposable, because if something happens to them on the job, they can easily go find some other workers, on a corner, through a friend. Yeah.
So when Claudia and Alex went to try and collect their wages, basically they're just, in some ways going with hat in hand. Was that kind of the case?
Yeah, it was. They have a lot of tools that they own, and they bring themselves and are expected to use their own tools as well. But they are told about this job, it pays well, and they go and show up. And when they had threatened their employer that they were going to leave, the another subcontractor of the Aldi market tried to convince them to stay, to like finish the job, and he would try to make sure that they would get paid. But they're all false promises.
How many years did you spend making this film? Over how long? Because did you follow the stories of each participant?
Yeah, we started filming Workers in 2014. I was sitting in, me and my producer Marisol were sitting in on member classes at the Workers Defense Project. They have these open member meetings that are open to the public, so that they can come and voice their complaints about an employer who is exploiting them, or maybe they got injured on the job and are seeking help. And so we sat in there to figure out like what was going on in the industry, what immigrants were facing. Immigrants are more at risk of being exploited in the construction industry than an American citizen. So we wanted to follow these workers, and through that we met Christian Hurtado, who was an inspector on the job. And then we started filming a lot of rallies. And at the time, in 2015, Roy Granillo had died. And it was just at the beginning of Workers' Defense Project fighting for a rest break ordinance in Dallas. And so we met the Granillo family there and began following them as they were, transforming into fighters really for the movement. And then we continued, and that's also where we met Claudia. She was also at the rally, and I knew I wanted to film a female construction worker since it's a male-dominated industry. And then we filmed all the way up until about 2017.
In the chat window here, John and Beverly say they found this film to be very, very frustrating because 10 minutes every 4 hours seems like the absolute least we could do for people who are working so hard in such hard conditions. Congressman Joaquin Castro, what was your initial reaction upon seeing this picture? And thank you again for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be with you. I know my first reaction for Chelsea and everybody that participated in the film and made it possible is thank you for doing it. Thank you for shedding light on what is the underbelly and the dark side of what has been called the Texas miracle and the construction boom in Texas for so many years. And there are 4 or 5, if not more, major American industries and Texas industries that would not exist and would not prosper the way that they do, but for immigrant labor, much of it undocumented immigrant labor, construction, hospitality, agriculture, meat packing, or agribusiness, I should say. So many industries that would not exist and prosper the way they do, but for undocumented labor. And oftentimes, as we see in this film, that labor is taken advantage of, and that labor is mistreated. And politicians don't do enough to protect the workers who are going through this. In the same way, as I watched it, I thought how it's akin in Texas, the Workforce Commission, the rules, the regulations, the laws being so lax, akin to what you see with the environment, where TCEQ is also very lax about environmental regulations. And so you have a lot of people breathing in dirty air, for example. And so I'm glad that y'all did it. And I hope that it raised a lot of eyebrows and was, even for somebody that's been in Texas, was in the legislature for 10 years and now been in Congress for 8 years. I learned a lot watching it. So I hope that more folks will have a chance to see it.
It was interesting, the CEO of Merrick, who appears in the film, and the company that, he's emphasizing safety in that one part, and he says, what we have today is not sustainable. But sadly, in some ways, I started to think about this after I watched the film a second time. I mean, he could be wrong, because y'all have both kind of alluded to this, that there's an endless supply of labor to be exploited. Does that make it harder to approach these issues from an economic or good business angle, or do you really have to focus on the human perspective? Either one of y'all answer.
Well, I would say that I'm going to speak to it from the legislative side. Whether it's sustainable or not, in large part depends upon whether you get people in political office who have the will, both at the executive branch level to write rules and regulations from the different state departments and even federal departments of labor, and in the case of Texas, with the workforce, whether you have the will at the executive branch and the will at the legislative branch, the state legislatures, the counties, the city governments, to actually do something substantive to change these things. And if you continue to have people in there who either are not aware of what's going on, which is very quite possible, that a lot of people don't see this, or simply don't have the will to change things for whatever reason, then I think that it will continue. People will continue to be taken advantage of. And there will be a new crop of people that will be taken advantage of, many of them immigrants and undocumented immigrants, in the years to come.
Chelsea, what do you see in the major obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stan Merrick is a Republican. He was very frank with us, even on camera, about how Trump was not the right choice because deporting 11 million people was not the solution. And he knows that the construction industry relies heavily on immigrants, and they are skilled workers and contribute a lot to the building of the state and really the country. But as much as he talks about the issues and the importance for workmen's compensation, he also provides 401k plans for his employees, full-time benefits, time off, sick and vacation days, and also has a department that works on getting citizenship for immigrants in Texas. And he's very proud of that, and he works really hard for that. But he's one really Republican business leader who is speaking out about that, and he will have private conversations with people who are just like him, who agree, but they don't do anything about it. So we need kind of more business leaders to be involved to, I think there are a lot of employers out there who are doing good and who believe in helping and protecting workers, but are just not seeking out certain programs that Workers Defense Project has. They have a Better Builder program in which they work with private employers to make sure they have an inspector on the job, provide workman's comp, provide a living wage, and have an outlet for workers to complain safely without retaliation about the injustices that they face on the job, and pushing, if people can learn more about Workers Defense Project and what they're doing, perhaps more people can push for legislative action in Texas or in the US, especially for rest breaks. There's no federal or state law that mandates workers have a rest break, and we saw that in Texas, really conservative leaders are against that because they believe it's bad for business, and really it's just hurting workers.
The Fair Labor Standards Act was passed back in 1938 and has been amended so many times since then. How come rest breaks, something so simple, really haven't been enshrined into that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say that, and Congressman Castro, you probably have more insight, but I mean, from the Texas perspective, this culture of the Wild West in the construction industry has been happening for decades. I mean, you could say it even, started with the Bracero program and the exploitation of Latino immigrants. And we've just seen that continue. And considering that Texas is the only state with no workmen's compensation requirement, there's a lot that the construction industry can get away with, and that culture's been like that for so long, and it continues to allow the state to prosper, and thus this Texas miracle is just touted.
Yeah, and I would just add that we ought to be including and amending the law to include things like rest breaks. And you're right, Texas has been a state that's had, comparatively speaking, very few rules and very few regulations over the years, and workers have paid a price. I remember in 2016 was probably the last time I looked fully at the comparison of the states, but Texas had the most accidents of any of the states on the job. So we have often the worst, if not one, or often the worst, and sometimes just one of the worst labor records of any of the states in the country in terms of the danger presented to workers on the job. And that's got to change in the coming years.
Mary asks for either of y'all, I guess, what improvements have you seen, if any, and what are the biggest challenges that need to be addressed, that arose from the issues that are illustrated in this film?
Yeah, I mean, since the filming of the film and the release of it, and I think someone's maybe not on mute. I'm hearing an echo.
We got you. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, really the biggest victory has been the passing of that rest break in Dallas, and that was back in 2015. In 2016, of course, with the Trump administration, we saw past records on the OSHA website be deleted or hidden. So holding people accountable, holding employers accountable for previous accidents or injuries that happened on their work site are no longer available. And not having access to that data is really hard to conduct research and policy in Texas and the US to figure out, what kind of injuries, what kind of deaths are happening on the job, how much money is being lost in stolen wages, to just figure out, what can be done on the legislative level to protect these workers and get them paid.
In addition to what Chelsea mentioned, I think generally, I don't believe it's gotten better actually in the last few years. I think it's gotten worse under the Trump administration. But you're talking about issues like workplace safety, and avoiding wage theft or preventing wage theft, especially with undocumented immigrants. Obviously, people are in a very vulnerable position, and it says that in the film, right? It covers that, where they can be stolen from by these employers who know that these folks can't go through the American legal system oftentimes to find recourse. And so that's the last few years in the past. I want to focus for a second on what is possible in the coming years, because we may have a new president in January. And if that's the case, I think that there should be efforts to change the federal rules and regulations to make them more favorable towards workers, and to make some of these improvements that have been languishing for a long time. And you also may have a new Senate and a new Congress overall. And again, that's when when you get the right conditions politically, you got to be able to strike to make positive changes. And I hope that we can do that.
Elisa asks Chelsea, where is Jasmine now from the film? Because she had a lot on her shoulders representing her family and a cause.
Yeah, she did. Jasmine and her father actually in 2017 had gone to the state legislature and she spoke in front of one of the Senate committees to try to fight for a state rest break law. There was someone from a real estate group there that sat right next to her and apologized for her brother's death, but then fought against a state rest break. And as much as the Senate was kind to her and listening to her, including former Senators Sylvia Garcia, it didn't pass, and it didn't even go to the House floor. But she is now 16, I believe, and just trying to survive school through, the pandemic that we're in. But she is extremely happy with the film and being able to share her story about Randy, and she's just so happy that his story can live on, not only in her heart, but in the hearts of others.
There you go. A reminder that if anybody has questions as we go through here, please either type them in the chat room, or if you want to raise your hand on camera, you can do that as well. Joan wrote earlier in reference again to Marek. She says his intentions are to keep workers, not really make a safe environment. If he were committed, he could get others in the industry to adopt humane working conditions. Is that the case, or is he? Do you think he's trying to? Is it basically just do business? I mean, how do you feel him out?
Yeah, I mean, when he still has a job to do, and he has positions to fill. So I think he probably tries his hardest to get reputable companies, but in the end, he's also competing for bids against companies who are underbidding projects because they know that they're not going to pay workers, and that was a sentiment that we heard from many people within the industry as we were filming. So he also has to look out for his company as well.
Yeah.
Mary asked, what are the best ways for us to amplify this issue? She heard the Workers Defense Project. Is that the correct name? And what are the other resources that you think people should go to?
Yeah, the Workers Defense Project is a great organization who are working for all construction workers, but cater mainly to immigrant workers as well. There's also the Equal Justice Initiative, and they have a fantastic legal team where Shayna Cotter, who was in the film, who's Claudia and Alex's lawyer, she is there at the Equal Justice Initiative now. And then there's a lot of great unions out there. If you want to support, or if you're part of one, amplifying their message. In Texas, we work closely with LEUNA and the Central Labor Council, Central Carpenters Labor Council. There's also SEIU and the Texas AFL-CIO.
We can post some of these. Since I'm recording this session, my plan is to paste it up into our Texas Public Radio YouTube channel later on, and I can take some of those links and place them in the description of the video for people there. So Claudia and Alex at the end of the film are still looking for their wages, the vast majority of them. So there's that issue. And also, what happened with that police call? That was there any fallout from that when that happened to them, when they originally tried to collect their wages?
Yeah. So the Claudia and Alex's employer had threatened them, threatened their lives. And that's actually like a crime against an employee in the US, or a worker. And so Claudia and Alex were actually eligible to apply for U visa. So they have put in that paperwork. It's been about 3 years, I think, 2 or 3 years since that paperwork has been submitted, and they're still waiting on a status. But if they could get that U visa approved, they could at least have some protection to work freely in the US, and just feel comfortable or not live with that fear of deportation and being separated from their family. But that's still in the long waiting line, I guess. So in a strange way, Claudia has mentioned how, this exploitation that happened to her, she's somewhat thankful because perhaps, it could lead to them getting some sort of working papers here in the US.
John and Beverly ask, for other industries, there are resources to find out how employers treat their people, such as Glassdoor. Is there something like that in the construction industry?
There is some recent data on OSHA's federal website, and you can look up employers there. If I have found it to be a very difficult search engine, to be honest. But we have also posted some resources on our website, buildingamericandream.com. And there's probably more websites on, Carl also mentioned IBEW, Union as well, and kind of the other organizations that I had mentioned.
Monica writes, COVID-19 has amplified systemic inequities disproportionately impacting communities of color. Construction crews are no different. What can be done to hold contractors accountable to ensure safe work sites?
Well, I would point out that we need stronger federal regulations and state regulations. And we dealt with this issue. I'm chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We dealt with this issue a lot in meatpacking plants early on during the pandemic because they were one of the areas or one of the workplaces, along with nursing homes, for example, and cruise ships, where COVID-19 spread quickly among a lot of people, and the safety regulations were lax. So again, I mean, we need to put pressure on the executive branch, hopefully starting in January, to improve the rules and regulations, to do everything that they can from, that doesn't require Congress, that they're empowered to do as an executive, and then go to Congress and ask Congress to do the same thing, and same thing with the legislature. And then the enforcement, besides the rules and regulations on the books, you've got to have strong enforcement. Because if you don't have anybody really enforcing it, then it doesn't really matter what laws or rules you have on the books. So to me, it's all of those things.
Congressman, I have a really dumb question right now, if that's okay. Which is, when people are trying to, contact their office of their congressman, senator, somebody in the legislative branch, really, honestly, what is the best way to do so? Is it writing a letter? Is it calling the office? I mean, what is the way that people can best get their voice heard in this process?
That's a great question, and it's one that's been asked of me, throughout my time in public service, and it's kind of changed over the years. I got elected when I was 28 years old and started serving in the state legislature in 2003. And at that time, before social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I would have said that the best way was to send somebody an email, because a lot of the representatives, the state representatives, check their own email, whereas the phone calls and the letters were often screened. And so I would still say that you can email people, but this is the second part. It depends whether you want a response or not. So I know that sounds strange, but if you just want to get your point across, and there's a chance that the representative will see it, then I would say social media, where you're tweeting at somebody directly or writing on their Facebook page, ironically, is probably one of the strong. I don't know if it's the best way, but it's probably one of the surest ways that it will get seen by either the representative or somebody very important in their office. So social media actually, I think, works for a lot of the representatives. Now, there's some representatives that don't even use email. So they're not on Twitter and they're not on Facebook or Instagram or anything. And for those folks, it's a little tougher, right? You got to try to set up a meeting with them and just try to talk to them face to face if you can, or their chief of staff or their legislative director. And don't discount the staff, especially when the larger the office, so Congress, senator, governor, the larger the office, the more the elected official relies on staff. So those staff members, talking to them is actually very important, and can be very beneficial. Because I know some people get miffed when they say, well, I didn't get to visit with the congressperson or the state senator or whatever. But if you're meeting with the legislative director in particular or the chief of staff, there's a good chance that that's going to get back to the member of Congress.
It's good information. Thank you so much. Chelsea, where are you now that the film is, quote, in the can and is, being shown on PBS stations and available for streaming as it has been this past month? That's obviously not the last step in the line of a process that began when you started chasing down this particular group of stories and this issue. What do you see in the future for you as a filmmaker following this process, as well as what your interests may lie in terms of documentary filmmaking in the future?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sharing this film with the PBS audience was, a big goal of ours so that we can share this story with millions of households and hopefully open up some eyes, and have people, get involved and look at construction workers in a different way. They're all around us. I'm sure we've all passed a construction site, this week, if not today. And so hopefully people will be more engaged with the issues at hand. And also there's an election coming up. So this film is part of the PBS voting programming lineup, because labor and immigration are definitely on your ballot. So go out and vote. But yeah, we are currently securing educational distribution so that we can share this film with colleges, universities, and schools throughout the US, and they can keep in their libraries and share with their students, especially technical and trade schools as well. And the film is streaming for free through October 15th, and then it will go under the PBS subscription platform for about 60 days. So if you have people who want to see it, they can still watch it. They just need to log in to their PBS Passport program. And then I'm continuing to develop some more documentaries, and have some stuff in the works that I'm not ready yet to announce, but working on social justice issues as well.
Thank you. Before we, I have one more call out here for any more questions from the audience before we wrap up this evening. And just any final thoughts at all from either you, Chelsea, or you, Congressman Castro, about this. Joan asks, is there a booklet that is essentially a Know Your Rights vehicle? They have them in New York City through Make the Road.
Yeah, I'll say you can go to our resource page on our website at buildingtheamericandream.com, and we have some Know Your Rights guides there, some links to download some in English and in Spanish. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and message us if you're looking for more concrete resources that maybe we haven't included, or you have any suggestions to some other resources that we can put on our website.
And again, want to say that I'm grateful that y'all did this film, and it is eye-opening. And as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I'll do everything, particularly over the next few days while everybody can see it, to try to get the word out and to share it. And that I hope that we can make change in the coming years too. and resolve to do things differently here in Texas. Amidst all the prosperity, I'm going to say before the pandemic, because the economy here has been devastated, families have been devastated, but I'm confident that we can get back on our feet. But even before the pandemic, amidst the prosperity of businesses, you had a lot of workers and families that were suffering quietly, and not being able to get justice even when they were wronged. And going forward, that's got to change in our state. It's got to be a state where everybody can find prosperity in the life that they're looking for. So thank you for doing the film.
Thank you, Congressman.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Castro, and thank you, Chelsea Hernandez, for making a really marvelous picture following an important issue through such human stories. It was a great movie to watch and to learn from.
Thanks, Nathan. Thanks everyone for being here and watching the film. Thank you.
All right. Well, again, we will be posting this video later on YouTube, and I'll send out the link on our TPR Cinema channel so that you can share this discussion with friends and colleagues. And of course, please share the news in the next few days, as this film is available free at pbs.org with people as well. And thanks so much for being a part of the discussion, and thank you for your support of Texas Public Radio as well.